I watched my bride rush across our wedding reception to comfort her ex-boyfriend, their embrace intimate and excluding me entirely. When I told her our marriage was over, she laughed, dismissing my pain as copied drama from my past relationship. Her words revealed the truth. She never respected me as my own person. She thought my smile meant acceptance of her betrayal. She was wrong. Behind that smile, I was already planning the perfect revenge she would never see coming. I don't copy anyone's playbook, I write my own. I never expected my wedding day to be the day I'd truly see the woman I married, not through the veil of romance I'd constructed, but in the harsh light of who she really was. The reception hall sparkled with champagne flutes and laughter. I stood watching guests mingle, feeling that strange sense of displacement newlyweds often describe. 5 hours married and everything should have felt different, more significant somehow. That's when I saw him arrive. Liam, Sarah's ex-boyfriend. The invitation had been her idea, a gesture of mature closure, she'd explained. I hadn't argued, I trusted her. I remember holding my champagne glass too tightly as I watched her reaction. The subtle straightening of her spine when she spotted him across the room. The momentary freeze in her conversation with her cousin. The way her eyes tracked him as he moved to the bar, looking uncomfortable and slightly out of place. I didn't process what was happening at first. When she suddenly broke away from her conversation and began moving toward him with purpose. Looking back, I should have recognized the warning in my gut for what it was. My best man was saying something about the honeymoon suite, but his voice faded to background noise as I watched my bride of 5 hours reach Liam, who turned at her approach with visible distress on his face. Whatever composure he'd maintained crumbled at the sight of her. The champagne glass shattered in my hand. I barely felt it. Sarah's hands were on his face. Not a casual greeting between old friends, an intimate gesture. Her fingers cradled his jaw in a way that spoke of muscle memory, of countless times she'd touched him exactly like that before. His hands found her waist with the same practiced familiarity. I didn't need to hear their words. Their bodies angled toward each other, creating a bubble that excluded everyone else in that crowded room, especially me, especially her husband. I remember moving through the reception like a ghost, mechanically shaking hands, accepting congratulations, all while my eyes kept returning to my wife and her ex-boyfriend, still locked in conversation at the edge of the dance floor. I didn't cause a scene. That wasn't who I was. Instead, I waited until their conversation ended, waited until she rejoined the celebration, her face flushed with an emotion I couldn't name but recognized all the same. "Can we speak privately?" I asked her, keeping my voice steady. She followed me to a small alcove near the coat check. Confusion, replacing the glow she'd carried from her conversation with Liam. I looked at her for a long moment. Really looked at her. "The marriage is over," I told her. I expected shock, tears, frantic explanations. What I got was a laugh, not nervous, dismissive. "Oh, Alex, don't be so dramatic," she said, rolling her eyes like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "You're just copying what Jessica did to you. You'll get over it." I didn't know it then, but those words would become the foundation of everything that followed. Not the betrayal itself, but the casual dismissal of my feelings, the reduction of my decision to someone else's past drama, the absolute certainty that she knew me better than I knew myself. Her words scraped something raw inside me. Jessica was my ex who'd walked out 3 years ago. Sarah had listened to me work through that pain, had held me through it. Now she was weaponizing it against me, dismissing my genuine reaction as derivative, unoriginal, a copied response from someone else's playbook. I felt something shift inside me, something fundamental changing in how I understood not just Sarah but myself. "Maybe you're right," I heard myself say, my voice soft. Relief washed over her features so quickly that I knew, with absolute certainty, that she believed I would indeed get over it, that her dismissal had worked, that I was exactly who she thought I was, predictable, manageable, someone whose feelings could be invalidated with a simple reference to his past. I rejoined our reception with practiced composure. I smiled for photos. I danced with her mother. I cut the cake, feeding Sarah a piece with a tenderness that made the wedding photographer coo appreciatively. All while something cold and clear crystallized in my mind, a resolve that took shape with terrifying precision. I watched Sarah laugh with her friends, her eyes occasionally drifting to where Liam sat at the bar. I saw the narrative she believed, that I had overreacted and was now accepting her version of reality. I realized something on my wedding day that most people never understand about themselves, that there are depths to us we never access until something breaks through the surface of who we think we are. As my new wife danced with her father, her diamond ring catching the light, I knew the truth no one else in that reception hall could see. This wasn't the end of our story. This was just the beginning of something else entirely. I was nobody's copy, and I was about to make that painfully clear. The weeks after the wedding reception unfolded like a carefully orchestrated performance. I maintained the facade of reconciliation, playing the role of a man working through what Sarah continued to call my overreaction. Internally, I was documenting her every move, learning her patterns with scientific precision. I know Liam is important to you, I told her over breakfast one morning, watching her expression carefully. I shouldn't have jumped to conclusions. The relief that washed over her face was almost palpable. She reached across the table, squeezing my hand with what she probably thought was genuine affection. I knew you'd understand eventually, she said. You always do. I remember wondering if she had any idea what was happening behind my eyes as I smiled back at her. If she could see the cold calculation, the meticulous planning taking shape with each passing day. The architecture of revenge requires patience. Each day, I collected information. Her career ambitions at Meridian Corporation, her nervous checking of her phone when she thought I wasn't watching, the subtle changes in her schedule that always seemed to coincide with Liam's availability. I didn't know then how perfectly her predictability would serve my purposes. 3 weeks after our wedding, I followed her to a coffee shop downtown. I watched from across the street as she sat with Liam, their fingers brushing across the table, their heads bent close in conversation. I didn't feel anger anymore, only a clinical interest like a scientist observing specimens in a lab. That evening, I began my first strategic move. You seem preoccupied, I said when she returned home. Work stress? Just a lot on my plate, she replied, not meeting my eyes. Liam's startup is struggling. He's looking for investors, and I've been trying to help him network. I nodded sympathetically. His tech concept is solid. The market timing is just unfortunate. Her surprise was evident. You know about his company? I make it my business to understand things that matter to you, I said simply. Looking back, that was the moment I first felt the power shift. The moment she began to believe her own narrative, that I was exactly who she thought I was, and that her dismissal of my feelings at our wedding had been correct all along. The next morning, I established a shell company and made my first anonymous investment in Liam's struggling tech startup. Not enough to save it, but enough to position myself as the silent benefactor he desperately needed. Enough to gain access to his business operations, financial records, and future plans. I think I need to accept that Liam will always be part of your life, I told Sarah over dinner the following week. In fact, I'd like to get to know him better. The gratitude in her eyes was almost touching. The way she kissed me that night had a new enthusiasm, a relief that her two worlds might coexist without conflict. She never questioned why I had changed my mind so completely. Never wondered what might be lurking beneath my newfound acceptance. I was reclaiming control one calculated move at a time. By the second month of our marriage, I had begun cultivating professional relationships with board members at Meridian Corp, Sarah's dream employer. I positioned myself as an industry consultant with unique insights, offering value while gathering information that would prove invaluable. You've been networking more, Sarah observed one evening. New clients? Just expanding my professional circle, I replied. Actually, I met James Thompson from Meridian yesterday. He mentioned they might be looking for someone with your expertise soon. Her eyes lit up instantly. Really? Did he say what department? Special acquisitions, I believe. I mentioned your name. He seemed interested. That night, as she slept beside me, I updated my journal. The real one, not the fabricated version I had strategically left accessible for her to find. In meticulous detail, I documented every inconsistency in her stories, every meeting with Liam she thought I didn't know about, every professional connection I was cultivating at Meridian. I wasn't just planning revenge, I was constructing it with architectural precision. By the 4th month, I was hosting dinner parties where I subtly elevated Liam's professional profile to Sarah's colleagues. I made strategic introductions, positioning him as a rising star with innovative ideas, all while quietly identifying the fatal flaws in his business model that would ultimately be his undoing. Liam seems to really respect your opinion, I told Sarah after one such gathering. He values your insight. She smiled, pleased by the observation. His company has real potential. He just needs the right backing. Sometimes all it takes is one person believing in you, I agreed. I remember how her face softened at that, misinterpreting my words as a reference to our relationship rather than the trap I was methodically setting for them both. The fabricated journal I left accessible to her worked exactly as intended. She never mentioned reading it, but her behavior changed subtly, more confident in her manipulation, more certain that she had correctly assessed my wedding reaction as derivative drama I would inevitably overcome. You seem different lately, she remarked one evening as we prepared for bed. More confident. I met her eyes in the mirror. I'm seeing things more clearly now. It was the first completely honest statement I'd made in months. By the 6th month of our marriage, I had secured Sarah an interview at Meridian Corp. My recommendations reached key decision-makers, ensuring she would be considered for a position that would place her under impossible scrutiny with unrealistic expectations, a perfect scenario for the ambitious yet ethically flexible person I now knew her to be. Simultaneously, I arranged to receive full access to Liam's company financials as part of my investment oversight. What I discovered were legitimate but well-concealed financial irregularities, the kind that would devastate investor confidence if exposed at precisely the right moment. The pieces of my revenge were falling into place with a symmetry that almost felt like destiny. Sarah thought she was winning. She thought she understood me. She had no idea that every step she took forward was exactly where I was guiding her to go. I wasn't just reclaiming my agency. I was becoming something entirely new, calculating, patient, and absolutely committed to showing Sarah exactly who she had so gravely underestimated on our wedding day. 4 months into our marriage, I had woven myself into the fabric of both Sarah and Liam's professional lives. Every introduction, every dinner party, every casual mention of industry connections served my singular purpose. I was no longer just playing defense. I was orchestrating their futures with surgical precision. You've become quite the social butterfly, Sarah remarked one evening after we'd hosted her colleagues. Everyone was impressed by your insights on market trends. I smiled, swirling my wine. Just making connections. Speaking of which, James from Meridian mentioned they're finalizing the job description for that special acquisitions role. Her eyes lit up instantly. The ambition that drove her was so predictable, so easily manipulated. Did he say when they might start interviewing? Within the month. He specifically asked if you were still interested. I remember watching her try to contain her excitement, calculating how this opportunity would fit into her complicated relationship with Liam. She had no idea that every step forward she took was exactly where I was guiding her. That same week, I received the first comprehensive financial reports from Liam's company as part of my investment oversight. The irregularities were subtle but unmistakable, creative accounting that wouldn't withstand serious scrutiny, the kind that would devastate investor confidence when exposed at precisely the right moment. I didn't recognize it then, but I was becoming something I never thought possible, calculating, patient, and absolutely merciless in my pursuit of justice. The journal I deliberately left accessible continued to serve its purpose. Sarah thought, She was being discreet, but I caught her replacing it exactly where she'd found it. A satisfied smile playing on her lips as she read entries suggesting I was working to overcome my insecurities about her past with Liam. "I've been thinking about our wedding day," I said casually over breakfast the next morning. "About my reaction to seeing you with Liam." Sarah tensed slightly before composing herself. "What about it?" "I think I understand now why I overreacted. It was never about you and Liam. It was about my own issues from past relationships." The relief that washed over her features was almost comical. She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "I'm proud of you for recognizing that. It takes real emotional maturity." I nodded, accepting her condescension with practiced humility. "You were right all along. I just needed time to see it." Looking back, I'm amazed at how completely she believed the narrative she'd created, that I was exactly who she thought I was, and that her dismissal of my feelings had been correct. Her certainty would be her undoing. I hosted another strategic dinner party that weekend, inviting key players from Meridian Corp alongside Liam and several potential investors for his company. I watched as Sarah subtly positioned herself between worlds, the ambitious professional and the supportive friend, to Liam. She played both roles flawlessly, unaware that each successful performance only tightened the trap. "Liam's presentation tonight was impressive," I told her after our guests had left. "His tech concept could revolutionize the industry, if he secures the right funding." "I've always believed in his vision," she replied, helping me clear wine glasses. "He just needs the right opportunity. Sometimes all it takes is having the right people in your corner." I agreed. The irony of my statement went completely over her head. As Sarah's interview at Meridian Corp approached, I strategically fed her insider information, insights gained through my carefully cultivated relationships with their executive team. Nuggets of corporate culture, decision-maker preferences, upcoming projects that would impress in an interview setting. "You seem nervous," I observed the morning of her interview, handing her coffee. "Don't be. You're more prepared than any candidate they'll see today." She smiled gratefully. "I couldn't have done this without you. The connections, the insights. You've been amazing." I kissed her forehead. "What are husbands for?" 3 hours later, she called me from her car, voice breathless with excitement. "They loved me. The panel said my understanding of their upcoming sector expansions was exactly what they were looking for." "Congratulations," I said, genuine pride in my voice. "I knew you'd nail it." I hadn't just helped her prepare for this interview. I had engineered it, crafting the path and removing obstacles, positioning her perfectly for the role I needed her to have. A role with just enough power to be dangerous but not enough to be protected when things went wrong. I remember feeling a moment of doubt that evening as we celebrated her success. A fleeting question of whether my elaborate plan for revenge made me as morally bankrupt as Sarah. But then I remembered her laugh at our wedding reception, the casual dismissal of my feelings, the reduction of my decision to someone else's past drama. The doubt evaporated. This wasn't just revenge, it was justice. When Meridian offered Sarah the position 2 weeks later, I presented her with an ornate desk plaque for her new office. Sarah Mitchell, Director of Special Acquisitions. She was too excited to notice that I'd changed the engraving from Warren to Mitchell, already preparing for the divorce she didn't see coming. "This position is everything I've worked for," she told me, eyes shining with ambition. "The acquisition budget alone is more than I ever dreamed of managing." I pulled her close. "You deserve every opportunity to shine. I can't wait to see what you accomplish." What she heard was supportive pride. What I meant was something else entirely. With Sarah now positioned at Meridian and Liam's company gaining momentum, thanks to my anonymous investments, I had created the perfect storm. The financial irregularities in Liam's business would remain hidden just long enough for Sarah to commit Meridian resources to his company. A conflict of interest that would be impossible to explain away when exposed. I wasn't just reclaiming my agency anymore. I was redefining myself as someone Sarah had never seen coming, someone capable of orchestrating her complete professional destruction with the same dismissive ease she had shown me. The facade I'd maintained for months was no longer just a cover. It had become a weapon, allowing me to move unseen through the lives of people who thought they knew me completely. In their blindness to who I truly was, they had given me everything I needed to dismantle their carefully constructed worlds. They still had no idea what was coming. But they would. Very soon. Sarah landed her dream position at Meridian Corp precisely 2 weeks after her interview. Director of Special Acquisitions, a role with significant power over investment decisions and acquisition funding, a role I had meticulously engineered her to obtain. To my brilliant wife and her new beginning, I toasted that evening, champagne, flutes clinking. May all your professional dreams come true. Her smile was radiant with ambition and relief. The woman who had dismissed my feelings at our wedding now believed I was her greatest champion. The perfect supportive husband, encouraging her career while putting my own insecurities behind me. I didn't realize then how completely she had underestimated me. The next morning, I presented her with the ornate desk plaque I'd had specially. Sarah Mitchell, Director of Special Acquisitions. She ran her fingers over the engraving, too caught up in her excitement to notice I'd already changed her surname from Warren to Mitchell. Preparing for the divorce she didn't see coming. This position is everything I've worked for, she said, eyes shining. The acquisition budget alone is more than I ever dreamed of managing. I kissed her forehead. I can't wait to see what you accomplish. What she heard was admiration. What I meant was anticipation of a very different kind. 2 weeks into Sarah's new role, I activated the next phase of my plan. Through my shell company, I sent an anonymous tip to Liam's major investors regarding the financial irregularities I'd discovered. The timing was deliberate, coinciding with a critical fundraising round his company desperately needed to survive. I watched from my office as Liam's professional world began imploding. His frantic calls to Sarah increased in frequency. His emotional state deteriorated with each investor who pulled out. It was fascinating to observe how quickly success could transform into catastrophe with just the right pressure applied at precisely the right moment. Liam seems stressed, I commented casually over dinner that week. Everything okay with his company? Sarah's fork paused halfway to her mouth. How did you know? He called while you were in the shower. Didn't leave a message, but he sounded upset. She set down her fork. There's an issue with his investors, some questions about financial reporting. It's probably nothing, but the timing couldn't be worse. Poor timing indeed, I agreed, sipping my wine. Especially with Meridian's new innovation fund launching next quarter. His company would have been perfect for that. I watched the idea take root in her mind, the subtle shift in her expression as she connected these dots I had carefully arranged for her. You think Meridian might be interested in his technology? I shrugged. With the right advocate in-house, why not? The acquisition would be small enough to fall under your discretionary budget, wouldn't it? Looking back, that conversation was the trigger that set everything in motion. The trap I'd spent months constructing was finally ready, and Sarah walked into it willingly, even eagerly. Over the next few weeks, I carefully fed Sarah successful rescue strategies from my own professional experience. Strategic insights that appeared brilliant in theory, but were specifically designed to fail in Liam's particular situation. Advice that would entangle her more deeply in ethical compromises while seeming completely legitimate. The key is quick, decisive action when you see potential being undervalued, I told her one evening as she worried over Liam's increasing desperation. Sometimes you have to move resources creatively to secure an opportunity before others recognize its value. She latched onto my every word, interpreting my calculated guidance as wisdom rather than the carefully crafted poison it was. I found her at our dining table at 2 a.m, surrounded by spreadsheets and financial models. The stress was evident in her hunched shoulders, in the way she rubbed her temples. You're working too hard, I said, setting a cup of tea beside her. Liam's company is imploding. The technology is revolutionary, but the investors are pulling out because of some accounting discrepancies. If Meridian doesn't move quickly, everything will be lost. I placed my hands on her shoulders, massaging gently. You seem stressed. Remember, sometimes the best solution is the least conventional one. My deliberately ambiguous advice pushed her toward greater risk-taking, toward allocating Meridian resources beyond her authority to stabilize Liam's failing company, toward professional suicide. I didn't know it then, but watching her desperation grow gave me a satisfaction I hadn't anticipated. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice being served to someone who thought themselves untouchable. As Sarah began secretly diverting company resources to save Liam's business, I methodically documented every unauthorized transaction, every ethical breach, every moment of collusion between them. I built an irrefutable case that would be impossible to explain away when exposed at precisely the right moment. Their late-night phone calls increased. Their professional lunches grew longer. The intimacy between them that had wounded me at our wedding was rekindling under the pressure of shared desperation. But this time, I wasn't the naive husband, watching in pain. I was the architect of their destruction, watching my design unfold exactly as planned. The board is asking questions about preliminary acquisitions, Sarah mentioned one evening, her voice carefully casual. James Thompson specifically asked about a technology investment I've been researching. James has always been thorough, I replied. What did you tell him? That it's still in the evaluation phase, that the financials are promising despite some irregularities. She hesitated. Was that the right move? I squeezed her hand reassuringly. You're the expert. Trust your instincts. What Sarah didn't know was that James Thompson and I had lunch weekly now, that our conversations often centered around innovative companies with questionable financial practices, that I had been carefully planting seeds of suspicion while maintaining plausible deniability. I remember feeling a moment of something like pity that night as I watched Sarah work frantically to save Liam's company. She truly believed she was protecting something valuable, both the technology and her connection to him. She had no idea she was sealing her own professional fate with every unauthorized allocation, every ethical compromise, every lie to her superiors. The trap was set. The players were in position. All that remained was to spring it at precisely the right moment, when the damage would be catastrophic and irrevocable. I wasn't just orchestrating revenge anymore. I was delivering consequences that Sarah's actions at our wedding had earned. The casual dismissal of my feelings, the reduction of my pain to someone else's drama, these weren't just wounds to be nursed. They were debts to be paid in full, and payment was coming due very soon. The professional empire I had helped Sarah build began crumbling with devastating speed. 3 months into her role at Meridian, I made an anonymous call to their ethics hotline. The carefully crafted tip triggered an internal audit focusing specifically on unauthorized resource allocations within the Special Acquisitions Division. There's an emergency board meeting tomorrow, Sarah told me, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. The audit team has been reviewing all my acquisition recommendations. I frowned with practiced concern. That's standard procedure, isn't it? Not like this. She paced our kitchen, phone clutched in her hand. They've specifically requested documentation on preliminary investments I've been managing, including Liam's company. I pulled her into a comforting embrace. They're probably just being thorough. Your decisions have all been sound, haven't they? The slight hesitation before her nod told me everything I needed to know. I didn't realize then how satisfying it would be to watch the trap close around her. The same woman who had dismissed my feelings at our wedding was now desperately seeking my reassurance, unaware that I was the architect of her unraveling. The next morning, I ensured Liam received documentation proving Sarah knew about his financial irregularities before investing company funds. The implication of collusion was devastating. The timing, hours before her emergency board meeting, was deliberate. My phone rang at 2:17 p.m. Sarah's name on the screen. They know everything, she said, her voice hollow. Someone sent the board copies of every transaction, every email between me and Liam. They're saying I deliberately concealed information to divert resources to his company. That's absurd, I replied, injecting the perfect amount of outrage into my tone. Who would do that? Liam thinks one of his investors is trying to take control of the technology by discrediting us both. What did he say at the meeting? Her silence stretched for several seconds. He wasn't at the meeting. He should have been there to defend the investment, to defend you. I've been trying to reach him since this morning. He finally called, back just before the board meeting. Her voice cracked. He told them I pressured him to misrepresent his financials, that I knew about the irregularities but promised to push the acquisition through anyway. I remember the rush of cold satisfaction that flowed through me. Liam's betrayal of Sarah was exactly as I had predicted. When faced with professional ruin, he had sacrificed her without hesitation to save himself. He's lying, I said with convincing indignation. We need to fight this. It's too late. The board has suspended me pending a full investigation. James, Thompson specifically mentioned potential criminal charges for financial misconduct. I closed my eyes, savoring the moment. Come home. We'll figure this out together. That afternoon, I watched through our living room window as Sarah's car pulled into the driveway. Her typically confident posture was gone. She moved like someone in physical pain, shoulders hunched against an invisible weight. I had prepared for this moment with meticulous attention to detail. Our dining table was set with the same champagne we'd had at our wedding. Divorce papers were arranged neatly beside her place setting. The timing, the symbolism, all of it carefully constructed for maximum impact. Looking back, I'm amazed at how completely I had transformed. The man who once loved Sarah had become someone capable of orchestrating her destruction with clinical precision, and I felt not regret, but satisfaction. She entered our home, dropping her keys on the console table. Everything's falling apart, she whispered, reaching for me. I don't understand why this is happening. I guided her to the dining room, gesturing for her to sit. I poured champagne into crystal flutes, sliding one toward her before taking my seat. Sometimes the universe has a way of balancing the scales, I said softly, touching my glass to hers before sliding. The divorce papers across the table. Confusion clouded her features, then slowly cleared as recognition dawned. This was you, she whispered. All of it. I smiled. Not the practiced smile I'd worn for months, but something genuine. The first, real expression I'd allowed her to see since our wedding day. Oh, Sarah, I said, mimicking her dismissive tone from our reception. Don't be so dramatic. This is just what happens to people who make poor decisions. You'll get over it. The blood drained from her face as her own words came back to her. You destroyed my career, my reputation. You ruined me because of one mistake at our wedding. Not because you comforted Liam, I corrected her. Because when I told you the marriage was over, you laughed. You dismissed my feelings as unoriginal, as copied drama from someone else's playbook. I leaned forward. That was the real betrayal. I methodically explained how I had engineered everything. Liam's professional problems, her dream job at, Meridian, the trap I'd set knowing she would sacrifice ethics to save him. I showed her the fabricated journal she'd found, detailed how I'd positioned Liam for failure, while simultaneously engineering her professional rise specifically so her fall would be more devastating. You never recognized me, I continued, my voice calm. Not really. You saw what you wanted to see. Someone predictable, manageable, easy to dismiss. You never considered that everything you thought you understood about me was exactly what I allowed you to see. Tears streamed down her face. For the first time, I was seeing genuine emotion from her. Not the calculated responses she'd given me throughout our relationship, but raw, unfiltered devastation. Why go through all this? She asked, gesturing weakly at the elaborate setup. Why not just leave after the wedding? I studied her across the table. Because you needed to understand exactly who you dismissed that day. You needed to experience the consequences of underestimating me so profoundly. Her phone buzzed insistently. News of her professional disgrace was spreading. Her carefully cultivated reputation was disintegrating in real time as we sat across from each other. Liam will tell people what you did, she said, a desperate edge to her voice. He'll expose you. No one will believe him, I replied simply. Or you. The evidence points to your collusion, not my involvement. I've been nothing but a supportive husband in everyone's eyes. The documentation is irrefutable. I stood, retrieving my already packed suitcase from the hall closet. Everything had been prepared down to the smallest detail. One more thing, I said, pausing at the door. I've accepted a senior position at Global Financial. They're acquiring what's left of Meridian Corp after this scandal breaks. I'll personally oversee the restructuring that will erase what's left of your professional legacy. Her sob followed me as I walked to the door. Was any of it real? She asked desperately. Any part of us at all? I paused, hand on the doorknob. Every part, I said without turning back. That's what made it so easy. I stood in the doorway for a moment, savoring the echo of Sarah's sob behind me. The satisfying finale to a symphony I'd been conducting for months. I turned back to face her one last time. This was you, she repeated, her voice hollow with shock. All of it. I placed my suitcase down deliberately. This moment deserved my full attention. After all, I'd orchestrated everything leading to it with painstaking precision. Let me be perfectly clear, I said, returning to the table. Your betrayal at our wedding wasn't just comforting Liam. It was how easily you dismissed my feelings afterward. How you reduced my pain to someone else's storyline. How confidently you assumed you knew me better than I knew myself. Her tears had stopped now. Something harder had replaced them. Realization, perhaps. The dawning comprehension of exactly who she had so casually dismissed. You told me I was copying Jessica's drama, I continued. Do you remember that? You took my genuine pain and invalidated it completely, made it derivative, unoriginal. I hadn't planned to explain this part so thoroughly, but in that moment I needed her to understand exactly what had driven me. So I showed you what original really looks like. I remember how her eyes widened as I methodically laid out the architecture of her destruction. The anonymous reports to Liam's investors. The careful cultivation of her dream job specifically so she would have the authority to compromise herself ethically. The calculated advice that pushed her toward greater risk-taking. The deliberate timing of the evidence that ensured maximum damage to both her and Liam. Why not just leave? She asked again, her voice barely audible. I studied her across the table. The woman I had once loved now reduced to the shell I had meticulously crafted her to become. Because some lessons need to be learned profoundly, I replied. You didn't just hurt me, Sarah, you fundamentally misunderstood me. That required a correction more significant than simply walking away. Looking back, I realized that moment was when I felt the final pieces of our past relationship detach completely. The man who had stood beside her at the altar no longer existed. In his place was someone she was only truly seeing for the first time. The board meeting today, she said slowly. James Thompson's questions, the documentation they had. How did you get all that information? I smiled. James and I have lunch every Wednesday now. Golf on Sundays occasionally. He's been quite concerned about certain investment patterns in your division. I simply helped connect dots he was already noticing. Her phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, then looked up with renewed horror. They're announcing a full investigation. Criminal charges are being considered. Yes, I nodded. Financial misconduct carries serious penalties, especially when the evidence is so comprehensive. I hadn't anticipated the depth of satisfaction I would feel watching her professional world collapse in real time, the careful edifice of her ambition crumbling with each notification on her phone. What about Liam? She asked. Did you destroy him too? Liam destroyed himself, I corrected. I merely accelerated the timeline and ensured you were caught. In the blast radius. His financial irregularities were real. His betrayal of you when cornered was his own choice. I simply created the circumstances where both were exposed simultaneously. I checked my watch. Speaking of Liam, He should be receiving notification right about now that his primary investor is pulling out completely. His technology patents will be acquired by a subsidiary of Global Financial next week. For pennies on the dollar, of course. Her eyes narrowed. Global Financial, where you've accepted a senior position. Effective immediately, I confirmed. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? The realization of how completely I had outmaneuvered her seemed to physically impact her. She sagged in her chair, the fight visibly draining from her body. You've thought of everything, she whispered. Not everything, I replied. Just everything. That matters. I stood again, retrieving my suitcase. The house is yours. The divorce papers are generous financially. I have no interest in leaving you destitute. This was never about money. She looked up, confusion mixing with the devastation on her face. Then what was it about? Consequences, I said simply. Learning that people are not always who you assume them to be. That dismissing someone's feelings as copied or unoriginal might reveal more about your limitations than theirs. I remember feeling an unexpected moment of clarity as I stood there. This revenge had transformed me. The calculating precision with which I had dismantled her life had reshaped my own in ways I was only beginning to understand. One final thing, I said, opening my briefcase to remove a sealed envelope. This contains evidence of your unauthorized transactions that didn't make it to the board. Yet. Her eyes widened. More? Insurance, I corrected. Should you decide to publicly challenge the narrative of what happened, or attempt to implicate me in any way, this goes directly to the prosecutors. The outcome of that would be significantly less comfortable than the current arrangement. I placed the envelope on the table. Consider it motivation to accept the consequences with dignity. Her laugh was bitter, hollow. You've destroyed everything. My career, my reputation, any future in this industry. What dignity is left? That's entirely up to you, I replied. But I'd recommend against underestimating yourself. It's a mistake I'm intimately familiar with. I moved to the door, pausing once more. In that moment, I felt neither triumph nor regret. Only the cold satisfaction of justice meticulously delivered. You once reduced my feelings to someone else's story, I said, made me a copy of someone else's drama. I hope you now understand how profoundly you misjudged me. This was no copy. This was an original response to an original betrayal. Her voice stopped me as I reached for the doorknob. Was any of it real? She asked again, desperation bleeding through. Any part of us at all? I considered the question carefully. Our first meeting, the genuine connection I'd felt, the plans we'd made, the vows we'd exchanged, all of it real, until the moment at our reception when she had revealed who she truly was. Every part, I said without turning back. That's what made it so easy. I closed the door quietly behind me, stepping into the evening air with a strange lightness. The burden of pretense I had carried for months had finally been set down. The facade had served its purpose. I wasn't the man Sarah had dismissed at our wedding. I wasn't a copy of anyone's drama. I was exactly who I needed to be, someone capable of ensuring that actions had consequences, that betrayal had a cost, that dismissal came with a reckoning. As I placed my suitcase in the car, I glanced back at the house one last time. The windows were dark except for the dining room where I'd left her, a single illuminated space containing the ruins of the life she had gambled with such careless confidence. I had given her my last dance, and she would remember every step.